Hey, I'm looking down my list and I see a big list of names showing up in this webinar today. So as I kind of work my way through everything and make my way through a little bit of small talk before we get started, just want to say hi to everyone who joined us today. And if you can hear me and see the birds and wildlife of the Everglades, go ahead and pop in there and let me know. I got one person saying they can hear me good. So yeah, I'll wait till I get confirmation from everybody, then I'll go ahead and get started on everything. All right, I'm looking at this, man. We got a big crowd in today. Everybody's saying, so I got confirmation everybody can see and hear me, which may or may not be a good thing, depending on how you look at it. I mean, it's probably better to hear me than to see me because I've probably got a voice. Probably don't have a voice for radio, but I sure don't have a face for radio. But welcome everybody. Glad you can make it today. And these are, even though I love teaching the webinars and teaching some kind of photography technique or some kind of educational component of photography, I absolutely love these slideshows, and just to kind of a little bit of time to brag about the places we've been and the things we get to see, and help share with you guys some of the things we see through my eyes, at least, and take you on one of the adventures that we do here at Backcountry Journeys, and that's birds and wildlife of the Everglades. Hey, I need to say this before I go any further. We're going to run this webinar on time today. It's going to last no more than an hour. And I tell you that because I want you to stay tuned, because at the end of this webinar, I'm going to have an exclusive offer for you guys. And it's a one-day offer only. So stay tuned with me. I'm going to share that offer with you later on. And that's just to kind of build a little bit of anticipation for that. And we'll I'll share that with you at the end of the slideshow. So I'm kind of rambling through here because I'm making sure I've got everything going right and going good before I get started. Again, the title of today's webinar is Birds and Wildlife of the Everglades. This is a backcountry journey adventures. This is actually an adventure that we started in, I guess the first trips we did were in 2021. I start losing track of my years. I don't know if you guys do that or not, but this is 2022. So the first trips we did was January and February of 2021. And I am lucky and honored, and I have a lot of gratitude when I say this, but I'm just lucky and honored to be the first one in Backcountry Journeys to get to do this trip. This is a trip I pioneered. Had a lot of help behind the scenes with Matt and Russ helping put together our itinerary. But when we got on the field, we got in the field, we perfected this itinerary and really put together a fantastic itinerary that, if you haven't been on this trip before, I think you're really going to enjoy, just because it's remarkable. I was telling my wife when I was building the slideshow this morning that actually this is I love the mountains of the West. I love Alaska. I love all the places we go, but this one right here has got a special place in my heart. Absolutely love going to Southern Florida, especially during the wintertime when it's cold everywhere else, even cold here in Texas. And it's just the things that you see there, and the amount of wildlife that you see. It's literally everywhere. And I'm going to share some of those pictures with you that I took on this trip. And as always, like all of my webinars I do, if you've been here before, you've heard me say this. If you're new to the webinars, you'll hear this for the first time. But I always want to make this a dialogue and not a monologue. So if you have any questions as I go along, feel free to ask them. Pop in the Q&A and I'll ask them to go along. Questions can be about, technique. It can be about the lenses I use. It can be about anything, really. The kind of animal it is, if I don't tell you what it is. So feel free to pop in there and ask the questions and ask away, and we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Russell Graves. I'm coming to you live right now from Hackberry Farm at Dodge City, Texas. It's a little, I live in the country north of a little town called Dodge City, and I'm looking outside right now out my back door window, and it's still pretty cloudy and overcast. We actually had a pretty big tornado outbreak in the area yesterday. I think there were 20 or 21 confirmed tornadoes in Texas. And I actually had to do a speaking engagement last night in Denton, Texas. So I was in Denton, and there was tornadoes to the north, tornadoes to the south, tornadoes to the west. But when they got to Denton, all the storms, the severe storms split a little bit, and so we missed it. We just got a little bit of rain, a little bit of tiny hail, and even as they moved to the northeast and moved up to where my farm is, and where my family lives in this area too, we just got a lot of rain. So I'm looking outside; it's still gray and it's cool today, 50 degrees. And there's water standing everywhere. So we got quite a bit of rain last night, but it's been dry in Texas this year. So the water is a welcome sight. And so it's a great day to be here. Great day to be on this webinar. And so we'll go ahead and get started. One of the cool things about being in the Everglades, and again, there's no structure to this presentation at all. I'm just going to show you pictures and talk about them. But one of the really cool things that I never get tired of seeing are alligators swimming around. And there's literally, on these trips, one of the things that we do on these trips that I've started doing is I challenge everybody. We play a simple game. I want to see how many different animals we can photograph and identify on these trips. Now, the rules are pretty simple. I don't make it where it's got to be a magazine cover quality picture. It's just got to be a reasonably decent picture of the animal that's kind of an open-ended description, but it's got to be a decent picture of the animal that any reasonable person can look at that animal and be able to ID it. So, and I take some pictures of animals just to ID them, where some are better than others, but that's one of the things we start from day one and do. And as we go through this, I'll show you, I'll tell you the numbers we're kind of reaching on the number of species, as well as just kind of talk about some of the places we shot some of these pictures. But one of the coolest places I love down there is called the 10,000 Island National Wildlife Refuge. And this is, you'll go there and it's just a simple walk. It's flat across there. It's just a short walk into where we got to go. Gravel. It's paved part of the way and gravel the rest of the way, but you'll walk along this trail, and on both sides are wetlands, and we see alligators like that everywhere. And just to get that iconic shot of alligator with his eyes above the water, if you look at his eyes close enough, you can see trees in the skies reflected in his eyes. So that was about as low as I could get. I've always thought it'd be awesome. I really want to go swimming with alligators, but I haven't found the right place to be able to get that done yet, or if it's even legal in Florida. I think it is, but it'd be neat to be able to get in the water with them and shoot those split level shots where you can see the alligator below the water and above the water see the sky. But this is the closest thing we can get to that, and it's just a remarkable shot, and I love that. And thanks Rob for the comment on this shot. One of the things that we see all the time, and to give you a number, when I first started playing that game with the guests, we were hitting numbers. The first time I did it, and I keep track of this because every time we go, I keep a list of the animals we see. But the first time we played the game, we were hitting 50 animals, 50 species of animals. And then as the next group comes along and they, kind of get a little more excited about the game we play, about identify the species, then we start hitting in the 60s and every trip this year we hit in the 70s, and in the last trip I did there in late February, just about a month ago when I got back from there, 86 species was our count that we saw on the entire trip. And if you think about it, I may not photograph 86 species of animals a year outside of Florida. If I'm just traipsing around my house or going on some other, going to Alaska with backcountry journeys or going to Yellowstone, I'll see a lot of different species. But we see 86 species in the course of a typical trip. Starts on, the orientation is on Sunday, but a typical trip is Monday through Friday when we're out in the field actively photographing these animals. And to see 86 different species of animals, not only see them, but get a reasonable picture of one where you can identify it. And again, it doesn't have to be a great shot, doesn't have to be magazine cover quality, but just got to be able to identify it. But these are the examples of the shots we get, Anhinga sitting on a tree and just being really animated, whether spreading their wings out or calling like this one is, or this little blue heron. That was actually in the same area where the last alligator shot was, the 10,000 Island National Wildlife Refuge. But that's a lot of mornings during that time of year. It'll be really foggy, and so you get that kind of real atmospheric sort of look like in that little blue heron. Or to go into the 10,000 Island area, the mangrove islands of the area of the Everglades National Park, and just see dozens and dozens of osprey and bald eagles and peregrine falcons and and just all kinds of other birds. And that picture, I don't know if you can see it big on your screen, but that bird's actually carrying a fish, and you just get to see stuff like that, just up close and personal, and in an intimate way that that you'd be challenged to see any other way before. And one of the things that I talk about a lot, if you go on a trip with me, especially when it comes to photographing wildlife, excuse me, my nose is itching, is I always talk about the 3 shots that I always try to get of every kind of wildlife species. One is sort of, I call it the yearbook shot. And I don't really have a yearbook shot on that one. But a yearbook shot is just an identifying shot of the animal, just so, you think about your yearbook picture when you're in high school, just a shot to say, hey, this is a white ibis. And then the second shot I always try to get is a shot of the animal that in the kind of the habitat it lives in, sort of a wider shot, an environmental portrait, if you will. And then the third shot I always try to get is a shot like this of the animal doing something in action. And the action may be flying, it may be preening itself, it may be calling like the Anhinga on the last shot, or it may be like this one and catching a crab in the shallow water flats of the Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge. I mean, that's, again, I don't want to sound like I'm overselling the trip, but just to be able to drive up on stuff like this and be able to photograph birds feeding just yards away from you and be able to get full frame shots like this, it's pretty amazing. I just had a question come in from Linda. Linda says, how often are you using a tripod with your wildlife photos? And if you've ever traveled with me before, one of the things that I tell people all the time that's just, it will make you a better photographer, is use a tripod. It's the lowest tech piece of gear you've got, but it'll make the most difference in the quality of your photographs. So to answer your question, Linda, unless it's just something happening really, really, really quick, I always use my tripod. I'll take the time to get it out, move slow, set the legs up, just because that's the one piece of equipment I can tell you empirically made the biggest difference on my photography when I was a young photographer back in my 20s. I tell this story a lot. When I was in my 20s, I was starting to get to the point where, and I was shooting film at the time, but I was starting to get to the point where I could take pretty good pictures, but they were a little bit soft. They just didn't have the punch I was looking for. And so I had an older photographer, mentor friend of mine that was a professional photographer. And I asked him, I said, look at my pictures and what am I doing wrong? And he starts looking at them. And this is, again, using slides on a light table, looking at slides through a loop on a light table. And he tells me, he says, are you using a tripod? And I said, no, not really. I'm just trying to handhold, because my thought is I'm young and strong and I can handhold this stuff. And he's like, get a tripod, buy a good tripod. It'll make the biggest difference in your images. And he was exactly right. And even though the technology has gotten better, the in-body stabilization has gotten better, the lens stabilization has gotten better, the fact is a tripod will make the biggest difference in your photography, not only from a sharpness standpoint, but also from an intentional standpoint. I was going to make up a new word and call it intentionality, but just being intentional, because with the tripod, even with the wildlife, you'll slow down a little bit and you'll compose better images when you're using a tripod. So I always try to use the tripod. So there's my old man rant of the webinar so far, is about using a tripod. So if you ever ask me on it, I'll always say this in orientation meetings, and I'll tell people preemptively, hey, if you ask me if you need a tripod, my answer is always going to be the same. And the answer is yes. They make a huge difference. And thank you, Linda, for the comment on the white ibis image. And when's available, the cool thing about the Everglades is we'll see a lot of different, when people think about the Everglades, and I was guilty of this too before I really got to know it, I thought it was just one huge grassy sawgrass swamp. And that's kind of a misnomer, because the sawgrass are a part of it, but you also have cypress swamps, and you have these little wetland areas with lily pads, and that you see in this shot here, and you have some pine uplands, and you have some live oak uplands, and you've got these features called these strands, where it's just like where these cypress trees kind of follow along a creek, because the Everglades are alive. All of it is. It's not just a static water that's standing there in a swamp. It's actually a really wide river that flows from Lake Okeechobee down to the Gulf of Florida. And this water just moves really slowly through there. And so not only do we get to see alligators and wading birds and everything that's attracted to this water, one of the cool things that without getting yourself wet, I try to show people how to do underwater photography. It's just some pretty simple gear. And that's how I shot this picture of a Florida gar. And it's a smaller cousin to the alligator gar that's across a lot of the South, but this is a shot I took on one of the trips. And then Stan asked the question, do you have recommendations on a tripod that is reasonably light and easy to travel with? Well, it's kind of it's a little bit of a loaded question, Stan. The tripod I use is that Really Right Stuff. I don't remember the model number of it, but it's a lightweight tripod. Excuse me. It's a lightweight tripod. It's pretty easy to travel with. It's not one of those little travel tripods that's going to fold up pretty small, but as a rule, the bigger the lens you're going to use or the heavier the camera is, the sturdier the tripod you need. We had and I'm not picking on this person, but this is why you come on trips like this to learn. But we had a guest on a trip in the past who they had a big 500 millimeter lens, and they were trying to use one of those little bitty lightweight travel tripods with it. And so it was the tripod was absolutely useless because it won't hold your camera sturdy when you're trying to hold your camera on top of it. And so what I always recommend is look at whatever tripod you go with, Really Right Stuff. I've used Manfrotto tripods. I had a Gitzo tripod I lost last year in Yellowstone, and that's a long story, and we can visit about that later. But one of the things that you do is you figure the weight of your camera. You figure the weight of your heaviest rig. Whether I think, if I remember, Stan, I think you got the 200 to 600 millimeter lens, Sony lens, if I remember that correctly. And with the camera, you figure that weight, and then you've got to give it a little bit of weight on top of that. Maybe add 5 pounds to it, and then rate your tripod and your tripod head to kind of fit that weight. If you notice on the tripod manufacturers, they'll say this is rated for 20 pounds, and that's 20 pounds max. So if your camera weighs 10 pounds and you buy a 20-pound tripod, that should be good enough. So there's all kinds of them, but again, to cut to the chase on your question, I'd recommend a Gitzo or a Really Right Stuff or one of the carbon fiber ones that are lightweight. Linda said, are monopods as effective as tripods? They're a little less weighty and more portable. I'll actually use a monopod in a pinch. A good example, Linda, is when we travel to Katmai, when how much weight we can carry is an issue. And a lot of times, or when I don't feel like when I feel like I need to change some things out, I'll use a monopod. But from a physics standpoint, a monopod will never be as sturdy as a tripod. Tripod's the sturdiest, monopod's second best. Hand holding is the least, in my opinion, the least effective way. If you're going to hand hold, like if I'm driving around in my truck and I'm taking pictures of wildlife, I'll at least have a bean bag. Or if I get out and something's happening pretty quick, I'll try to lay prone on the ground or use something to brace myself against to be able to hold that camera as steady as I can. So Lynn asked the question. Well, Lisa asked the question about monopods, so that was my answer there. And then Lynn asked the question, how about gimbal heads? If your question is, do I have any recommendations for gimbal heads? I do. But if you're asking just, are gimbal heads a good option? Yes, gimbal heads are a good option. I use a gimbal head I've got a Canon 500 millimeter f4 lens that I use, and I love using the gimbal head. So if you want to clarify that question a little bit, if I didn't answer it correctly, I'll answer it later. I had someone tell me I'd love to go to the Everglades, but there's not really many landscape opportunities there. And there's really more than what you think. I was mentioning about the pine uplands, and the picture here is a picture of the pine uplands. These are just a palmetto flat and the pine trees that grow there, and they're beautiful places. And the cool thing is you change elevation just a little bit. I mean, this may have been a foot in elevation change above the swamp, but because you change elevation a little bit and the ground dries out a little bit, a whole different plant community could live there. And so that's one of the landscape shots I took on the Everglades trips this year. And then just more birds. This is one of the many species we see, blue-winged teal. In fact, I've got a pond right by my house. When I say right by my house, if I was to walk out my front door and go to the right 50 yards away, I've got a 3-acre pond right by my house. And right now I've got a dozen blue-winged teal that are on it, but I can't get this close to photographing them. I never had any good blue-winged teal pictures till I did my first trip on this trip to the Everglades. And then, a lot of people think all we see are I had this comment too, all we see are wading birds, and that's not true. Like this yellow-throated warbler. When you get in those different habitats, like the pine flats or like the cypress swamps, or even some of the brushy areas that grow around some of these wetlands, you get a lot of these brushy birds like the like phoebes and like the yellow-throated warbler. And then yeah, so Lynn, you just were clarifying on the question, asking if you recommend using a gimbal head. Yes, I do. And then Leonard says, do you use a tripod for birds in flight? Is it as much as I can, Leonard? It depends on the situation. On a situation like we're going to do on the Everglades, you've got enough time to see the birds coming where you can use a tripod, and it's not hard to use one. But there's times when I don't use a tripod, and those times typically if stuff is flying around pretty quick and I just need to be a little more active. But again, I mean, I probably use a tripod 80% of the time, maybe 90% of the time. And the 10% is if I'm not using it, it's because the action's happening too fast, or I've got some other way to brace the camera. Just a few more of the Everglades scenes. It's really cool when you can be out on the water, and that's at the edge of the Gulf of Mexico where we're at on the upper right picture, and see the sun going down like that. And so on this trip, we'll take 3 boat trips. We go on a boat. It's called a Carolina Skiff. It'll hold 7 or 8 people, and everybody's got a good view around them. Everybody has plenty of areas to brace on. So that's an example where it's hard to carry a tripod on the boat because we just don't have the room to set up. But I recommend people bring your tripod, but use it like a monopod, or use a monopod if they have it, or at the very worst case scenario, that boat has high sides and you can just kind of brace yourself on the sides of the boat. But it's just beautiful to be out on the water like that, like we do on the boat trips, and see that. And there's more palmetto flats, and then every now and then we get lucky because they're in the dry season that time of year when we're in Florida, but occasionally we'll have a thunderstorm pop up, and then we get lucky to be at the right time and find a osprey sitting on a nest with a rainbow in the background. This is one of the favorite shots I took when we were there last time. These are reddish egrets, and reddish egrets are not endangered, but they're not real common around there. It's not like you see a lot of them. Typically when I go, I'll see 1 or 2 every trip, just one, maybe, and most times solitary ones. Well, we saw one that was out there fishing in this water on the Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge, and then another one landed. And when they did, they showed each other how cool their hairdos were when they landed like that. So I just love this shot of them all with their head feathers all puffed out like that. It's just beautiful. So last year when we went to the Everglades, I'll say this: I'm a little bit of a softie, and one of the things that I really love about doing these trips is the guests that I go with become friends, and we stay in contact long after the trips are over. And we did a trip last year, and one of the guys on the trip was giving me a hard time about saying there's no way that you can take a picture of a dolphin where you can see its eye, because we'll go out on the boats and we'll see these dolphins around in the water, and we'll try to. And last year we tried to get pictures of their eyes, and we couldn't. We'd get pictures of fins or get pictures of them of just their backs in the water and other things, but we couldn't get a picture of the eye. And so this year, on the very first trip we did in December, we had some dolphins swim up behind us and got in the wake of the boat, and they started jumping like this. And this is one picture of many that I took. And I was actually sitting at the back of the boat because all the guests sit up at the front of the boat, and then it's a center console boat, so the boat captain sits in the middle. And I just usually sit behind him so I'm out of the way because we're kind of mostly facing forward. When these dolphins swam up behind the boat and they started jumping behind us, I shot this. This was shot at 35 millimeters. That's how close they were to the boat. And so I immediately, because I've got a Canon R5, I immediately downloaded that picture onto my phone. And then I sent it out to everybody that was on that group last year, where that guy told me, you'll never get a picture of a dolphin with its eyes showing. And so everybody from last year that went on this inaugural trip got a chance to relive what we were seeing this year. And it was just a great experience. And it was really neat to get to share that with those guys. I'm going to let you ponder on this bird for just a little bit. We were cruising down the road, and I'm talking to everybody. We're actually going to the flamingo area of the Everglades National Park out of Homestead. We're driving down the road, and right before we get into the park, I look to my right and I see this guy standing over in the ditch, and we turn around and take pictures of him. If you look at Backcountry Journeys Tribe Facebook page, I posted this picture on there, but still can't figure out where it's a cattle egret, but I can't figure out what kind of dye he got into or where he got into. But anyway, if you've ever wanted to see a blue and white cattle egret, here you go. If that was on your wish list, that's one of the shots we got. I mentioned earlier, it's not just wading birds that we see. I've gotten pretty good at finding burrowing owls on that trip. And if you've never seen a burrowing owl before, they're really, really cool little bird. They're about that tall, probably, I don't know, 6-8 inches tall. And they live in abandoned tortoise burrows. So the gopher tortoise you see on the upper right makes burrows that these owls inhabit once the tortoises have moved out. And so there's parts of the area that we go to where we know exactly where to find these guys, and it's a lot of fun to go on the hunt for the burrowing owls as well as the gopher tortoises. And then that's a boat-tailed grackle sitting on a limb there below. Now, Michael says that's the dye. That's what I think it is. I think it's an agricultural dye that they got into somehow. Whether the bird was out there and got sprayed on top of him or he just waited out there after the fact. But I think it was a marking dye. I think you're exactly right, Michael, on that. So another bird that I've always had a hard time getting. So American kestrels, like it is on the left picture, and kingfishers, if you've ever tried to photograph either one of them before, they all have a instinctual knowledge of what kind of lens you use. And so they always try to stay a little bit further away from the biggest lens that you're using at that time. And so kestrels and kingfishers are always hard to get pictures of. But if you look hard enough and you spend time doing it, you'll eventually get fairly close to one. And this is just one of dozens of kestrel pictures we took on the trip. And then another couple of ibises in different kinds of light. One is backlit early in the morning, and then the other one is flying around at sunset. One of the cool things about the boat trips too is there's a rookery on an island, and so it's like a little airport out in the middle of the water where all these birds, when they're going to roost, they fly into in the evening. So we can go set up on the rookery, and the birds aren't afraid of us because they don't get pressured or anything or harassed by people, and so we can take that boat and get really close to the rookery. And there's those birds, and it's not just one kind of bird. It's ibis and pelicans, and I'll show you another couple of birds in a minute. I want to spoil this that fly into there. It's ibis and pelicans and snowy egrets and cormorants and anhingas and all kinds of birds just fly in wave after wave to these rookeries. And it's really cool to see them go to bed at night. Kathy asked the question, what's the best way to get the glare from the water to not be distracting? If you're help me on that question a little bit, Kathy. If you're talking about a particular picture that I've shown you already, I'll go back and talk about that. If you're talking about in general, just let me know that too. And this is I don't know if it's the same Anhinga, but I can take you to where there's this one branch I know of in the Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge that every single time, without reservation that I've been there, there's an Anhinga sitting on the branch. And then Lisa asked the question. I'm going to save that question for later, Lisa. If there's wood storks down in the Everglades. One of the fun things we love to do too is hunt for these red-shouldered hawks. Now this is the most common hawk you'll see in the Everglades, and and it's they're common, and they're fairly used to seeing people, but it's not always easy to get a picture of. And we had to sacrifice when we took this picture. So we're driving down the road. It's actually in the evening. We're kind of working our way back towards the hotel that night. And I saw this one sitting in the tree, and I knew it was a good branch, and it was going to be great light. And so I turned around and we parked, and I told everybody kind of how we're going to approach it so we don't scare it off, get as close as we can. And you know how a lot of people from up north, the snowbirds, go to Florida to overwinter in Florida just because it's warmer there? Well, I think I found the place where every mosquito in North America goes to overwinter, because it was in the swamp where we took this picture. So we parked the van, get out of the van, and start making the stalk to get a picture of this red-shouldered hawk. And I don't want to scare you on mosquitoes, but there are a lot of mosquitoes there. And I was the only one that got bit, because I was the only one, even though I was preaching to everybody, make sure you put on insect repellent. The bugs aren't terrible down there, but in this particular place, I guess they like the flavor of Russell, because I got bit a lot of times by mosquitoes. But we got the shot, and I survived. And then Kathy clarified that question and says, in general, you often can't keep the water out of the picture, yet the glare can ruin it. A lot of that, Kathy, is about angles and just trying to maintain low angles to your subject. And the lower the angle you can get, the more glare you can distract, or you can eliminate from the image. And when I see a picture that you're kind of describing, I'll talk through that one as well when we go through it. Now, one thing I will profess to be in is I love wildlife, but I also love everything about nature. One of the things, and I'll get a little preachy here. One of the things that I learned to do about 15 years ago is start identifying plants, and I just become appreciative of the different kind of plants that grow wherever I go. And so one of the things I try to do is document all the plants I see. I can't say this from a nationwide standpoint, but I'll tell you, I may have the best collection of native Texas plant images of anybody around, because every time I find a new plant, I document it and try to take a really good picture of it to be able to identify it later on. And so I love taking pictures of plants, and they're challenging in their own way. You know, wildlife is challenging because it moves around, but to take a good identifying picture of a species like the swamp lily that's on the left is not always easy, and try to get the angle right and get the light right and everything else to be able to identify that species. But two things I would recommend you doing is, one, start paying attention to plants, and whether it's flowers or just the Brazilian pepper tree, like is in the upper right, that's an invasive species for Florida. It's introduced into landscapes and it's become a little bit invasive. Or at the bottom, that's Muscadine grapes. If you ever heard a country song where they talk about muscadine wine, that's the vine that grows the grapes. And so one thing I challenge you to do is pay attention to plants and start trying to become a better photographer of plants. Take it from me, it will absolutely increase your enjoyment of being in nature, because when the wildlife is not being cooperative, you still have plants that you can look for and take pictures of. And number two, I use an app, and you've heard me talk about this a lot before if you listen to these webinars. But another thing that I'd recommend you do is download the app called Seek, SEEK. And what you can do is, once you take a picture of a species, you can use Seek to help you identify what that species is later on, and help learn more about it and where it lives, and find where it lives and all the facts about that plant. It'll just learning about plants will increase your love of the outdoors and increase your participation in the outdoors. And Lisa says, yeah, find the food plants for the birds. That's right. I mean, find the food plant, find the birds. That's exactly right. And that's what we try to do all the time. And that's one of the reasons why I started learning to identify plants, because whether you're talking about birds or anything else, if you can find an animal's food, the likelihood of that animal being there is going to increase. And since you mentioned that, one of the things I jokingly tell people is one of my superhero powers is I'm pretty good at spotting wildlife. And when people wonder about that and how you do it, it's not rocket science, really. It's a little bit of a trained eye. You've got to do it a lot to be able to spot wildlife. But number two is, I'll use Lisa as an example. If I'm looking for Lisa, I go to Lisa's neighborhood. I learn where Lisa's haunts are. I learn where her favorite restaurants are. And if I kind of go to those places over and over and eliminate everywhere else, chances are I'm going to see Lisa when I go there. And so that's how we find wildlife. I find wildlife. I learn the plants. I learn what they eat. I have a better understanding of where they're likely going to be. And so that way, when we go in the field, we're not spending all of our day looking. We can go right to where the wildlife's going to be. And I apologize for scratching my nose, but this time of year is allergy season for me in Texas. And my nose really itches during this time of year. And so you're lucky I'm not sneezing right now. But back to Lisa's point, you find the food, you find the birds. This is actually kind of a treat. We were watching an alligator, and we were next to this Brazilian pepper tree, and I heard a gray catbird calling from the woods, but I couldn't see it. And then that gray catbird flew right in front of us. I mean, that bird was 10 feet away when we took this picture, and sat on top of this bush at eye level for 10 minutes eating these berries off of it. And so we were able to get loads of pictures of that right there in beautiful, beautiful morning light. And it was a pretty phenomenal scene. When we go to the Anhinga Trail in the Everglades National Park, one place we go to, it's in a freshwater wetland that has a lot of lily pads, but that's where we go to see these birds on the left called the purple gallinule. And they're a beautiful purple bird. They have that really bright red beak. And the cool thing about them, and one of the things I encourage people to do while we're there, because you'll have plenty of opportunities to take the yearbook shot like I talk about there, but you also have a lot of opportunities like in the upper right to shoot detail shots of it. And one of the things that makes that bird unique, you can see in this detail, and they have enormous feet. And their feet are so big, almost like snowshoes, because they can walk on top of the lily pads and search for food. And then, of course, I'm just bragging again. There's my dolphin eye one more time. Rob asked, "What's the name of the plant app?" It's not just plants. It's also good for wildlife as well. Rob, it's called Seek, SEEK. And let me get my phone turned on. I'll show you that in a minute. And I use Seek in a couple of ways. One, I use it in the field, but where it really comes in handy is when I get home. If I can't remember the name of a bird or some other kind of animal, I can actually just show it. Well, I can, when I'm back home, I can show it to my computer screen and be able to identify it. If I'm in the field, and we do this a lot, I photographed when we were trying to build our species list. The last species I photographed on that very last trip was called a gray gnatcatcher. And I'd never even heard of that bird before. And then I took a picture of it that you could identify, and I used Seek, the Seek app, and I used the Seek app and was able to show the back of my camera to my phone using the app, and it identified it right there in the field. And then that's what it's called. Oops. I see everything backwards here. Oops, I'm getting notifications. But anyway, it's called Seek. It uses the camera on your phone to be able to identify. It also geolocates where you're at. So that way it's going to find all the species that are typical of that particular area and help identify what it is. It's not all the time accurate. Sometimes it misses, but for the most part, it'll get you in the ballpark. And it's a pretty good resource to have, especially when you're in the field. I'd mentioned earlier going to that rookery, some of the different birds you see, and we were sitting at the rookery this year, and then I saw soaring towards the rookery to roost for the night is this frigate bird. And these birds are remarkable in the sense that they will fly for 23 hours a day. They'll soar. They've got a big wide wingspan, and those guys, we hadn't seen one the whole trip, and then one came in to roost right in front of us. And yes, that's Seek by iNaturalist. That's correct, Rob. And then once this one landed, another one wanted its spot, so there it comes in to take its spot, and we're able to shoot that picture. And this is all taken from the boat. And these are a few shots from the flamingo area. There's a crow picking on a buzzard that was in a picnic area. I mean, it wasn't even we didn't have to work hard to get that. There was a buzzard there eating something off the ground. Then a crow came around and started harassing it, which I thought was a pretty cool shot. I like buzzards and crows. And then that area we go to is the only place in the United States where alligators and crocodiles live in the same habitat. So you have an alligator swimming at the top, and then that crazy looking one at the bottom, and they are crazy looking. You know, people ask when I see a crocodile, how will I know? And I always tell them, you'll know, because they look so much different than alligators. And so that picture on the bottom is a crocodile swimming towards us down in that flamingo area of the Yellowstones. Now, of the Everglades. I don't know why they call it flamingo, because flamingos don't live there, and we've never seen a flamingo there, but that's just the area it's called. Carol asked, was the Frigate Bird in Florida? Yes, it was in Florida. And this is a ibis walking around on top of an oyster bed. So we go to in the 10,000 island area. When we go out on the boat rides, there's a lot of oyster beds out there that, as the tide drops and those oyster beds are exposed, these birds will get on top of those oyster beds and kind of dig around for oysters and bugs and little crabs and everything else they can find. And that reddish egret, the two that I showed you pictures of earlier, this is the one that when he was hunting by himself, and those are the coolest birds to watch hunt for food, because they'll use this technique where they shade the water, and then it helps eliminate the glare from the water so they can see down into it better. And they'll just pick off little crabs and little shrimp and little bugs and fish all day long. And we watched that guy hunt like that for 30 minutes or an hour. And there were other birds out there too, but this one was so much fun to watch, because again, they're so animated, and it's just a lot of fun to sit there and watch them do that kind of stuff instead of just standing around all the time. And then one of the wish lists, everybody that goes, are roseate spoonbills, and we'll see roseates just about every time we go. I'm trying to think. I think there was maybe one time we went, we didn't see any. We saw them flying. No, I think we've seen them every trip. But that's a roseate spoonbill that we found that was just kind of hanging out in a tree. And then another picture of that reddish egret hunting. And then the picture in the lower right, that's a juvenile yellow-crowned night heron that had figured out how to catch a catfish out of a little pothole wetland that we stopped at to photograph. And kind of surprised me. He come flying up, and he couldn't fly very well. He was lumbering up to try to get up to the bank, and when he got there and turned around and posed for us, he was holding that catfish in his mouth. I don't know that he ever ate it. We never saw him eat it. He eventually flew off with it, but it's still kind of crazy to see that scene. And one of the cool things about the Everglades I love too, it's a chance to learn how to photograph in tricky lighting conditions, and really learn how to photograph in a way that doesn't require you to go back and change it in post-processing. And so this picture right here, I can show you the original. This is how it came out of the camera. And this is one of the things I try to teach people when we go there, is how to get the exposure right the first time, because the more you get it right the first time, the less work you have to do on the back end. And to me, the more enjoyment it puts in photography, because you're not always having to sit behind a computer and working on pictures. But there's a lot of good things in my mind going good for this picture, just not only in terms of the dark background, but these things have beautiful eyes. So that picture there, back to, I can't remember whose question it was about the glare on the water. That, there's a little bit of glare off that water, which to me is not off-putting that much. I guess I could have spotted it out, but I didn't. But I just love the picture of the great blue heron on the left. I just love it because it's, you can take pictures of great blue herons front lit, but anytime you get a chance to really do a nice backlight photo of any kind of animal, whether it's a bird or a mammal or whatever, I just absolutely love, because I just love the ring light around the bird, and the way that the spider web and the mangrove leaves are backlit. It just makes for an engaging image. It's kind of a quiet moment that we saw there in the swamp. And then that's just another one of the many species we see there, and that's a brown anole lizard that's on the side of a strangler fig. Species on the left was a first for me, and I didn't know what that was when I photographed it. I mean, it looked like some kind of woodpecker, so that's what I called it at first. But using Seek by iNaturalist in the field, I was able to show the picture to the back of my camera. And can anybody guess what that animal is? I'll let you comment if you want to guess what it is before I tell you. But yeah, that we were actually waiting on somebody to get back to the van, and that was taken out the window of the vehicle when we were sitting there in the parking lot. It's that accessible. And then of course the beautiful roseate spoonbill on the right. Those things are just incredible, and how they look, and just the coloration of them being pink. Oh, Rob's close. Yellow belly. If you've got Seek on your phone, you can probably identify it right there. Yep. Linda says yellow-bellied sapsucker. That's it. I learned a new one that day. And again, I used it. I identified it in the vehicle off the back of my camera using the Seek app. And but I was happy to add that one to the list because that was the first sighting that we'd seen on any of those trips on that one. And every time we go, the list of animals we see keeps getting longer and longer and longer and longer. And I just love keeping up with that list. And in fact, well, my phone's turned off. I'm not going to show you. I was going to show you what the list looks like. And who asked the question earlier? Are there wood storks in that area? Yep, there's a wood stork right there. I've got more pictures of wood storks, but I really like this one, the low angle of it, and just being in that great light. That was one of my favorite wood stork shots I took, because that's kind of that. As I talked about the 3 shots, it's not really a yearbook shot. It's more kind of an environmental shot, and that's what I like about that picture of the wood stork. Patricia says you get them in your yard. Are you talking about the wood storks or the yellow-bellied sapsuckers? And then Rick says he shot, I guess, he shot a sapsucker in his yard or in New Jersey last week. Yeah, they're pretty birds. And then another thing that people don't realize is these cormorants and how beautiful. They may be one of the ugliest birds going, but they've got the prettiest eyes, and you can see their emerald eyes there. Carol asked the question, I think in regards to the frigate birds, are they all over Florida or just in the Everglades? I can't answer that question. I haven't been all over Florida. The only place I've ever seen them is the place I've been to the most, and that's the southern tip of Florida in the Everglades. All right. We're about 10 minutes before quitting time. I got a few more things I want to share with you. And for you guys that stuck with me, we've still got a lot of people in the audience. So a lot of y'all have stuck with me. Any questions so far before I go with, I've got a couple more slides to show you. And again, I tried to sprinkle in some educational stuff as we went along. And but this was just kind of showing, these are all these pictures I took on these trips I went on this year. And so by extension, if I took the picture, everybody else that was with me were able to take these same pictures of the same birds that we were there when we were there. And it's just I said it before, and I'm not just saying that because I'm giving these slide presentations. I absolutely love the Florida Everglades. It's just such a magical place. The weather's so nice the time of the year I go, and it's just the amount of wildlife you see there is just incredible. And so I'm gonna talk a little bit. Lisa asked any mammals like coyote. Haven't seen any coyotes. One of the things a lot of people want to see are Florida Panthers when we're down there, but the chances of seeing Florida Panthers are almost zero. I guess there's always a chance, but they're pretty much zero. The mammals, not a lot of mammals. As I'm thinking back, we have seen manatees before on the trip, but the one thing curiously that we haven't seen are deer, and I haven't really figured that out. I would think we'd see them. I think we would see them in some of the places we go to, but we haven't seen them yet. And then Linda asked, how do you expose the high contrast shots, the ibis and the spoonbill with the black backgrounds? Well, it's kind of a 1, 2, 3 step process, Linda. And this is one of the things I teach early when we're doing the orientation evening is I shoot almost every picture I've ever taken on aperture priority. And so when I shoot on aperture priority, and this comes with experience, I've done a webinar about this before too, and so I'll cut to the chase pretty quick. Whenever you take a picture of anything, the camera is going to do one of three things. It's going to, one, get the exposure right. Two, it's going to underexpose it. Three, it's going to overexpose it. And so when you're in nature, and if you've done it enough, you start figuring out that if it's got a dark background, the camera is going to tend to overexpose the image. Or if it's got a bright background, the camera is going to tend to underexpose the image. An easy way to look at this is if you think about, and everybody's done this, you take a picture in the snow, you look at the picture, the snow looks white, it doesn't look white, it looks gray. And that's because the camera underexposed it. And so I just know what the camera is going to do. And so by shooting an aperture priority, I just dial in exposure compensation. If I know the camera is going to overexpose the image in the case of a dark background, I've got to take light away. So I'm going to dial in about a stop minus a stop of exposure compensation. So I'm gonna underexpose the image a little bit. The camera is gonna be telling me I'm doing it wrong, but because of experience, I know I'm doing it right. A scene like this of this Anhinga looking at me, that's a camera will get that right almost every time because it's nothing's too bright or nothing too dark. It's just kind of a middle tone image. But anything with a bright background or a dark background, the camera's not going to get right, and so then it's just a matter of underexposing or overexposing and exposure compensation. And you can do that on manual too, or you can do it on shutter priority. I just use aperture priority. And that's kind of a quick way to go through it, but that's kind of the way I do it. Linda asked, what's the best time of the year to visit this area? I don't know the best time of the year. I just know the time of year I usually go, which is we go on backcountry journeys, which is December, January, and February. And then William asked the question, and I'm going to go back to the one I think he's talking about. So bear with me. I think it's this one. William asked the question, the shot of the two birds jockeying for the roost in midair was so well focused. How did you capture it? I was mindful of my settings, first of all, and always being mindful of how the camera's set. And number two, a trick I teach too on these trips, and I'll tell you this, is if you're shooting a telephoto lens, they've all got a focus limiter switch on the lens, or most of them do. The ones I've seen have. And so, in other words, what that focus limiter does, it's just a switch you change on the lens that won't let your camera rack through the whole range of focus. So we know that we're not going to be 3 meters away from these birds, so it's going to be 15 meters plus. And so I set the focus on my big lens. I set the focus limiter where all it will focus is from 15 meters to infinity. And so the camera, when I see action happening like this, and I point at it, the camera can acquire autofocus just so much faster. And so that's how I did it. Kim asked, do you see a lot of snakes? No, we've seen a few snakes. I mean, maybe half a dozen on all the trips I've done, which averages half a dozen, average one snake per trip, Kim. Cynthia says, are pythons killing all the mammals, deer and rabbits, etc.? That's what I've heard they're being pretty hard on them, Cynthia, but Catherine, I'm sorry, but I don't know that 100% to be true. And then let's see, I got some other questions coming in. What meter mode do I use? I use on the Canon, it's called evaluative metering is what I use, Beth, on the metering mode on all these. I try to keep my camera settings pretty simple all the time. I don't change a lot of stuff on my cameras just because I think of camera settings like if I'm going to go to we've got a Mexican food restaurant in town called Los Amigos. It's my favorite restaurant in town. If I'm going to go to Los Amigos to eat supper tonight, there's a way I'm going to get there that's the most efficient way and it's quickest. And that's how I think about my camera settings. There's all kinds of different ways I could take to get to the same destination. But over time, I found the ways that work best for me. And so I stick to the same kind of metering. I shoot aperture priority. I don't change a lot. And that's how I don't miss very many shots when I'm in the field because everything's always ready to go at any given time. Diana says March and April also good times of the year for nesting birds. Yeah, that makes sense. And then Diana also says that the pythons are killing out raccoons. Let me get back to this. Oops. Do I have any other questions Let me go back before I give you that. Any other questions? I mean, I'll stick with you through this if you think of more. But if we escape this webinar and you don't, and you think of something later on, feel free to stay in touch. I mean, a lot of people know that if you send me an email, I will always respond. Sometimes I may be a day or two late, but I always get back with you. So if you have any questions, stay in touch. There's my email address right there, russell@russellgraves.com. I just, Rob, appreciate your comments there, Rob. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about is you're looking at the entire photography enthusiast community of Dodge City, Texas. And so whenever I get a chance to talk to people about photography, I just love talking about it. So I don't know if y'all saw this or not, and I don't mean this to be a if you're on the Backcountry Journeys Tribe page, about a month ago, I think it was, I shared something I found. We just built a house about a year ago, and we moved in, and there's still a few things I hadn't really gone through and unpacked, some non-essential stuff. And I was going through it, and I found a research paper I wrote when I was a junior in high school, which would have been 35 years ago this month. I was a junior in high school, and I wrote a research paper, and it's about wildlife photography. And I told my wife, I said, see, this proves this is all I've ever really wanted to do. And so anytime I get a chance to talk about it, it's just what I love doing. That's what I do for a living. It's what feeds my kids and feeds my family and provides us all the good stuff. So I appreciate everyone's patronage when you come in to listen to me give these presentations. And I really do mean that from the bottom of my heart. Here is, okay, as promised, here is the special offer. And tell me if that comes up. So if you want to do a trip to the Everglades next year, if you book today, they're going to knock $500 off this trip. Oops, hang on. I didn't send it yet. There we go. Okay. I think you should be seeing it pretty quick. I think. I can't see what you see on your end. So if you can't see it, let me know. I'll tell you the code you use. But here's the things you need to know. $500 off the Everglades trip for next year. Only the Everglades trip this applies to. And then you got to book today if you want to get that $500 off. And then the code is all one word, Go Everglades. And so like I said, I can't see on what you see on your end. I can see the offer on my side. It's got a link on there to book now. They'll take you directly to the booking site if you think that's a trip you want to do and you want to go on it. I can tell you this from my personal point of view. It's a fun trip. It's a great trip to go on. I love doing it. Every year they ask me, do you want to do the Everglades trip again next year? Because they think for some reason I'm getting tired of it, but absolutely not. It's such a great trip, and we see so much stuff, and it's just a happy place to be. And so I am going to switch. I'm going to close my offer out, switch back over. Okay, Rob says that y'all can see the offer. So again, if you lose that, just go to Backcountry Journeys, click on the Everglades trip, use that promo code Go Everglades, and that'll give you $500 off. But today only, that's what you've got to remember. And if you have any questions or comments, if you have any trip specific comments about what we see and where we stay and what we do, you can contact me. If you've got any booking specific questions, whether it's about deposit or anything else, or any of the booking kind of specific stuff, that's best if you contact the good folks at Backcountry Journeys on matters like that. I don't have really much to do with that kind of stuff. I'm lucky where they take care of all the arrangements for us, and all I've got to do is go out with you guys and have a good time on the way. So I don't deal with much of the booking stuff. But again, if you have any questions on anything, just feel free to let me know. Michael, I'm looking forward to you coming on a trip with us sometime, and so I'm really looking forward to it. And again, if you guys don't have any questions, I'm looking at the time. I'm really good at this. It's 12:59, so I finished on time. Cindy says, what size limbs would be needed? Cindy, on that, a lot of people will bring that like that 150 to 600 millimeter Sigma or Tamron lens. That's a really good lens to use on this trip. And then you couple that with a wide angle lens, like a 24 to 70. That'll get you pretty much covered with a 2-lens setup on this trip. And I use a 500 millimeter lens for the wildlife, but again, that 150 to 600, if you have that, works good as well. Now I see another question popping in here. Oh, that wasn't a question, it was a comment. Thank you, Diana, for the comment. Thank you, Beth, for the comment. I'm glad you guys enjoy these webinars. I sure like doing them. They're a lot of fun for me, and it gives me a chance to again, talk photography to everybody. So I don't see any more questions coming in. It's 1 o'clock straight up. Again, there's my contact info. Oh, Jim asked a question. Another question popped in. As long as you have questions, I'll stay with you. I'm not in a hurry to go anywhere, but I don't want to keep you 1 second longer than you want to stay. Jim asked the question, do you go to Shark Valley? We have in the past. We don't always go to Shark Valley because Shark Valley, and I don't know if this is COVID related, but they changed the hours of when Shark Valley's open, as best I can tell. And so the hours aren't open at the very best time for us to get there and be in the best light. So typically we don't go to Shark Valley because there's nothing that we'll find at Shark Valley that we can't find somewhere else earlier in the morning in better light. I hope that explains it. Now, if Shark Valley was open at sunrise, we would go, but just to see the area, but we typically don't go to Shark Valley. Hope that answers your question, Jim. All right. Thank you, Bruce, for taking the time to listen. Yeah, again, I'll quadruple down on this. If you have any questions, russell@russellgraves.com. Feel free to reach out. I'll answer your questions best I can. And again, if you think you want to go on this trip, I take it from the only guy that's done it. It's a lot of fun, or only guy with Backcountry Journeys that's done it. It's a lot of fun, and we see a lot of really neat stuff. And it's literally non-stop action. It's got to be able to see 86 species in a week, or I say less than a week. So hope you book. Hope you get to see you later on this year, and look forward to talking. Oh, got another question coming in here. Let me look. Oh, I just said thank you. Thank you too, Cindy. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. And again, follow up if you have any questions, and talk to you guys soon. Take care.